Episode Heresy is finally here. We have 3 brand new aspects, tons of ability tuning, and of course a whole host of exotic weapon and armor reworks and changes. My name is Llama, and today I'm going to walk you through a side-by-side comparison of all the changes in patch 8.2.0 as fast as possible without any of the bullshit. So let's get into it, starting with Bolt Charge. Bolt Charge is a brand new positive arc verb that brings a new damage option to arc subclasses akin to an ignition or a shatter. The way it works is certain aspects, fragments, and abilities grant you 1 or more stacks of Bolt Charge, and after that, dealing weapon damage will increment your stacks to a maximum of 10, and each stack you gain also grants a small chunk of melee energy. Once you're at 10 stacks, your next instance of ability damage will unleash a devastating lightning bolt at the target location, dealing a pretty good amount of damage. Compared to ignitions and shatters, it is quite similar at base, plus multiple allies can trigger lightning bolts on the same target and have them both register their damage, something which you cannot do with ignitions and shatters. Some of the easiest ways to acquire Bolt Charge are through the new Storm's Keep Titan aspects, giving you several on barricade or thruster usage, collecting an Orb of Power with the Prismatic Fragment Facet of Purpose, and the Hunter Tempest Strike melee ability. 3 new aspects, 1 per class, have been added to the pure light subclasses. Titans get Storm's Keep, an arc aspect where upon casting your barricade or thruster class ability, you and any nearby allies gain several stacks of Bolt Charge. But if you choose to use barricade over thruster, standing behind it will allow your weapons to detonate maximum Bolt Charge as opposed to only your abilities, and from that alone I foresee this becoming a must-have resource in all raid and dungeon content going forward. Hunters get On the Prowl, a void aspect where upon entering invisibility a nearby target is marked for you and your fire team. Defeating the target will grant ability energy for all 3 of your abilities, as well as a boost to reload speed and stability, and spawn a cloud of weakening smoke that makes you invisible if you pass through it, letting you repeat the loop. This aspect synergizes with Lorentz Driver, where occasionally the bounty target and the On the Prowl target overlap, but more importantly, killing the On the Prowl target, even if it doesn't overlap with the bounty, will also drop a telemetry. Finally, Warlocks get Ionic Sentry, a deployable arc turret that blinds enemies in a small radius when it spawns, and after that chains lightning between enemies for a further 15 seconds, with each hit from it granting you a stack of Bolt Charge. In order to charge the sentry, you need to be getting kills with arc weapons or abilities or kinetic weapons, and once it's ready, it overrides your grenade slot. Moving on to some more general ability tuning, starting with Titan, all barricade splash damage reduction has been increased to 80% from the previous 60%, and the taunt strength and range no longer fall off over the barricade's lifetime. The Juggernaut aspect has received a handful of buffs where it now grants a 60% splash damage reduction with an additional 10% damage resistance to all sources while active. Plus, it now also grants stacks of Bolt Charge for blocking incoming damage. The Ballistic Slam melee ability now deals 30% more damage by default and doesn't require you to sprint as long in order to have it ready. Furthermore, the damage now also scales with distance traveled, meaning the higher you cast it from, the more damage you will deal to your target. And let me tell you, this is very noticeable. Post-patch from the same spot, I'm now hitting quadruple damage on Carl, and each enemy hit with it will also grant you a single stack of Bolt Charge, meaning that if you hit 5 enemies with it, you gain 5 stacks. The Unbreakable aspect across both Prismatic and Void has been majorly buffed. The bar now charges faster from blocking incoming damage, the blast attack now only costs half of your grenade energy, and received a 20% damage buff. The shield itself has more HP, meaning it won't break as often, and the Void Overshield granted from it also charges faster. Additionally, if you have the Sentinel super equipped, previously guarding would spawn an Orb of Power every 1 second, but now this has been increased to 4.5 seconds, a pretty big nerf. Ward of Dawn or Bubble now creates a weakening pulse on cast that lasts for 6 seconds, and finally for the Titan, the Consecration melee aspect has been hit with a hard nerf where the Scorch and Slam waves now deal 55% less damage each. Yikes. For the Hunter, the Tempest Strike melee aspect received a whopping 57% damage buff and now has an additional behavior where defeating any jolted enemies grants a stack of Bolt Charge. It doesn't have to be with the melee, it can be any jolted target. The Disorienting Blow melee ability now grants a few stacks of Bolt Charge on hit and now deals damage in an area around the player where previously it was only the affected target. And the AoE of the Blind Applied is now also considerably larger, while in your Arcstaff super, reflecting attacks now grants you stacks of Bolt Charge. Activating Ascension now triggers the effects provided by your equipped class ability, so if you have Acrobat Dodge equipped and pop your Ascension, you'll now also become Radiant. And similarly, Ascension is now able to proc Threaded Spectre where it previously could not. This is going to be super useful with Gambler Gambler's Dodge, because now every time you use your Ascension on a group of enemies, you'll also get your melee charge back. In a similar fashion, activating Ensnaring Slam now also triggers the effects of Marksman and Gambler's Dodge, as well as Threaded Spectre. Finally, Threaded Spectre across both Strand and Prismatic now has a 70% damage reduction to enemy fire, up from the previous 40%. For the Warlock, we have some super ability buffs. Chaos Reach now deals 15% more damage to non-champion targets, which does include bosses, and actually when combined with Geomax stabilizers, this comes out to a 48% buff, so definitely consider running this now. Similarly, Storm Trance also received a 20% damage buff versus non-champion targets, and when combined with Facet Courage and a Spirit of Star Eater class item, this super is now putting in some serious work. The Lightning Surge melee aspect no longer grants amplified on cast, but it also received a 30% damage buff, as well as each enemy hit now granting a stack of Bolt Charge, similar to Ballistic Slam. With the nerf to Consecration Titan and the buff this melee received, it could be a pretty good competitor now with an Inmost Syntho class item, so definitely keep that in mind. Handheld Supernova, or the Overcharged Magnetic Grenade with Chaos Accelerant, has received a pretty big buff where it now spawns 9 projectiles instead of 5, meaning it's effectively dealing 80% more damage on top of the blast, also receiving a 2 meter increase to its width cone and a 1 meter increase to its height cone. However, in PvP, the damage of each bolt has been reduced from 20 to 15 to account for the higher number of them. There have also been some changes made to elemental verbs that affect all classes, starting with Radiant, which now provides a 20% damage buff down from its previous 25%. A small nerf, but definitely something to keep in mind. Frost Armor received a buff in PvE only, where it now grants 6.25% damage resistance per stack compared to the previous 4.5%, meaning that at 8 stacks of the buff you now have a 50% damage resist compared to the previous 36%. Though keep in mind that on Prismatic it isn't possible to have any more than 5 stacks, which now works out to be a 31.25% damage resist compared to the previous 22.5%. Being amplified now provides you with a couple new benefits on top of the previous. You now get a flat 15% damage resist from all sources, as well as it now making enemies less accurate when targeting you, similar to how the Manticore's exotic trait functions, albeit to a lesser extent. Closing this section out, a few Prismatic fragments have been modified to account for the addition of Bolt Charge. Facet of Hope that grants increased class ability energy regen while having an elemental effect is now triggered if you're holding Bolt Charge. Facet of Purpose now grants 1 stack of Bolt Charge when collecting an Orb of Power instead of making you amplified like it used to, and Facet of Sacrifice, where getting ability kills while under a light elemental effect provides a small chunk of dark energy, now also works while holding Bolt Charge. Now we're moving on to some exotic armor tuning, and we're going to start with Titans and Citan's Ramparts. This exotic overrides your Towering Barricade into a special Assault Barricade that lets you shoot your weapons through it, and previously it featured a whole host of downsides that made it way worse than a normal barricade, but now those restrictions are gone. The health of the Assault Barricade has been increased to 500 from the previous 400, and it no longer increases your barricade cooldown or duration. It's literally best to think of it as a towering barricade you can shoot through with no downsides at all. Eternal Warrior now has a new additional perk where final blows with Fist of Havoc extend its duration, and for those that remember, this was the same as the old subclass 2.0 perk Trample. Ursa Furiosa and Spirit of the Bear have both received a rework. Now, instead of granting super energy, guarding with Unbreakable grants grenade energy after you exit based on the amount of damage blocked, and given that it now only costs half a grenade for the blast, with the right build and either Ursa Furiosa or Spirit of the Bear, you can essentially loop this ability infinitely. Kepri's Horn and Spirit of the Horn have both received a huge buff. Casting your barricade now unleashes 3 solar waves instead of 1, and upon contacting an enemy, each wave now also creates a sunspot. However, the catch is that the waves no longer rebound to the barricade and now requires you to have a solar super equipped. If you're using Thruster, the Spirit version spawns 4 waves lashing out in an X pattern instead on top of the previous solar blob it created. This change now makes the class item combo of Horn Abeyant pretty disgusting, because on barricade cast you now spawn 3 strand and 3 solar lashes that suspend and burn any enemies caught in the trail. Definitely expect a build on this soon. An Insurmountable Skullfort now allows base punches to grant a small amount of melee energy. This is to help you get your melee back if you manage to whiff it somehow, and in order from most to least energy gained is number 1 powered melees, number 2 non-glaive unpowered melees while knockout is active, and number 3 unpowered melees including glaives. Moving on to the hunter now, we first have Sealed Ahamkara Grasps. These gauntlets have been totally reworked to where melee or finisher kills grant Nightmare Fuel. Freshly drawn weapons while Nightmare Fuel is active are granted bonus damage and extend the duration of Nightmare Fuel, and gaining Nightmare Fuel reloads all stowed weapons. Turns out this is a 35% damage boost, which is fairly substantial, so definitely keep an eye on this exotic. Gwizin Vest now returns super energy on hits and not just kills when going invisible with the Spectral Blade's heavy attack, and the maximum super energy return per heavy attack has also been increased, and upon exiting invisibility, you now also leave behind a weakening cloud of smoke, including neutral game outside of your super. Renewal Grass have been buffed to where you now receive frost armor twice as fast while standing within your Dustfield Grenade. Foe Tracer and Spirit of the Foe Tracer have both had the duration of the bonus ×4 weapon surge upon damaging a mini-boss increased from 10 seconds to 15 seconds. Radiant Dance Machines have received a complete rework that now reads like so. Improves airborne effectiveness and hipfire mobility, range and accuracy for primary ammo weapons, primary ammo kills refill dodge energy, and while full, multi-kills grant bonus charges. So now, getting 3 or 4 kills with a primary weapon fully refreshes your dodge energy, and if it's full, it grants you reserve charges up to a maximum of 2 in reserve. Definitely an interesting change that I'll have to play with more to see how it feels. Dragon Shadow and Spirit of the Dragon have both received a small change where the Wraith Metal Mail buff now has a display timer to indicate how long it has left. Triton Vice now has a shorter delay before the explosion triggered by glaive projectile kills occurs, and finally for the Hunter, Spirit of Galanor has had its super energy return effectiveness reduced for both Golden Gun and Silk Strike while on Prismatic. This trait now only returns a maximum 30% super energy compared to the previous 50%. Now for the Warlock, we're starting with Storm Dancer's Brace, which has received a pretty hefty buff to its damage. Per stack of Ascending Amplitude, you now gain 20% increased Storm Trance damage compared to the previous 10%. So at the maximum 10 stacks, your Storm Trance now deals triple damage, but the catch is that like the Spirit of Galanor nerf, the maximum super energy return has been reduced from 50% down to 30%. Additionally, Ionic Blink now costs 50% less energy to perform while this exotic is equipped. Geomag Stabilizers have also received a pretty good buff where they now grant 7% super energy per Ionic Trace collected compared to the previous 2%. And a new functionality has been added where sprinting near max bolt charge tops it off, and the minimum stack count for this to work is 6. Some of you may remember that back in the day it had a similar perk that topped off your super, which was removed for PvP reasons, so it's nice to see it return in some capacity. I just posted a very strong build featuring this exotic, so go check that out if you want to learn more. Secant Filaments and Spirit of the Filaments received a small buff where now kills while Devour is active grant a small chunk of class ability energy, and unfortunately this amount really isn't that big, and also it appears to not be working at all on the class item version, so either the amount is really small or it's just bugged. Speaker's Sight has received a nerf where the healing turret no longer targets allies at full health. A portion of your shields must be broken now before the turret is able to begin healing you. However, you can damage yourself and it will then begin healing you. Crown of Tempest has been changed so that the ability regeneration buff now also works with all elemental abilities and not just Arc. The only catch is that you need a single Arc ability equipped for the exotic to function. A small nerf to Skull of Dire Ahamkara here. It no longer grants you bonus super energy if you're using any super other than Nova Bomb when getting kills while Devour is active, because previously it could be equipped while using a prismatic subclass with, for example, Song of Flame, and you'd still benefit from the bonus super energy gains, which has now been fixed. Finally, Verity's Brow and Spirit of Verity have both received a pretty major rework where Death Throes now works on a decaying meter system identical to Worm God Caress, and each stack of Death Throes now has bespoke grenade regeneration rates. The exact values are up on screen, but if you manage to trigger 5 stacks of the buff, you will now have it for a total of 30 seconds if you let it decay fully. Additionally, the Spirit version inherits 50% of the regeneration rates of the Helmet version, which wasn't previously the case. Again, the data is up on screen. Now for some exotic weapon changes, we're starting with Lorentz Driver. This weapon now gains 1 ammo to the mag from thin air every time you collect a telemetry data, and upon activating Lagrangian Sight after collecting 3 telemetry data, you instead gain 6 ammo to the mag also from thin air. Delicate Tomb now has a 10% chance to spawn an Ionic Trace from any defeated red bars, up from the previous 4%, and the bonus damage granted by Tempest Cascade has been increased from 30% to a whopping 100%, making it a very strong pick now. Furthermore, Tempest Cascade no longer has a timer and only expires after firing the shot itself. Darcy has received a pretty major rework where it has now become the Galahorn equivalent of sniper rifles. Hits while Personal Assistant is active grants you and any nearby allies improved recoil, flinch, target acquisition, handling, and damage to legendary sniper rifles, stacking up to 5 times. Providing 5 stacks of targeting data to an ally also improves the Darcy user's damage by a further 15% as well. The class exotic glaives have also received some changes, starting with the special shot no longer being tied to full glaive energy but instead a meter in the bottom left. In order to activate the perk now, you need to score a total of 6 hits from either the projectile or the melee attack, and then after that you can hold reload like normal and fire the special shot. Each glaive has also been granted elemental perk functionality. The Arc glaive has gained the effects of jolting feedback, the Void glaive that of stabilizing rounds, and the solar glaive that of incandescent. Additionally, when deploying the healing turret with the solar glaive, it creates a cure pulse upon landing, and much like the Speaker's Sight nerf, it too will not heal full health guardians and require a certain amount of shield to be broken before doing so. A small change here, but Centrifuge has had its magazine size increased from 38 to 45. Wow. Next, weapons with the fundamentals trait, so Hard Light, Dead Messenger, and Borealis have received a rework. Instead of the bonus stats which have now been removed, applying an elemental effect to yourself or enemies matching that of your currently equipped element will grant you a 30% damage buff for 10 seconds that is refreshable, which is especially easy to trigger with Hard Light and volatile rounds, by the way. Telesto no longer refills your equipped kinetic weapon upon getting multi-kills with it, but now any Void Final Blow will count towards this function, where Telesto kills count for 2, so you can now get 1 Telesto kill and say 1 Void Grenade kill and trigger the perk. Telesto now also has a new catalyst Harbinger Seethe, where after triggering Harbinger's Pulse 3 times, you can now special reload to cause your next shot to create a rain of Telesto projectiles from the sky, and it is quite the joy to look at. Getting a kill with Vexcalibur, provided you have an amount of Void Overshield, now fully recharges glaive energy, and the trickle-on rate of the overshield provided when guarding has been increased for both you and any nearby allies. Additionally, the projectile attack now deals 25% more damage to Vex, up from the previous 10%, and the melee attack now also briefly disorients non-boss Vex if it doesn't outright kill them. Wardcliff Coil now has an added behavior where firing the weapon grants you and any nearby allies 1 stack of bolt charge for every 2 rockets fired. So in total, a single trigger pull equates to 4 stacks of bolt charge granted. The Queenbreaker has received a pretty substantial change where firstly you can now swap between scopes by special reloading, but more importantly the combat sights have been changed to alter the weapon to fire a new 3-round burst. Sustained fire with this burst will cause the charge time to decrease from the default 533 milliseconds down to 300 milliseconds, all while retaining the exact same damage, which considering linears have also received a 10% buff, more on that in a moment, this change could make the weapon an absolute DPS monster. The marksman sights have also had the range of the chain increased from 8 meters to 10 meters. The colony has had its detonation damage increased by 40%, which puts it on par with unbuffed legendary grenade launchers, and in each kill instance the number of robots spawned has increased by 1. The exact data is on your screen now. Quicksilver Storm has received a slight buff where it now takes 17% fewer shots to trigger a rocket, which definitely helps it out. Previously it took 17 shots, but now it only takes 14. The Legend of Acurius has had its spread angle reduced by 33% and its maximum projectile range increased from 12 meters to 18 meters. The Fourth Horseman has had its rate of fire slightly reduced. You can see the visual difference here, and getting a kill with it now reloads the magazine from reserves. Lord of Wolves has received a light rework where instead of having to special reload to trigger release the wolves, it has now become the default hipfire mode. The catalyst has also been changed to make it so dealing damage while release the wolves is active, scorches targets, and while ADS, getting kills, spreads scorch to nearby targets. So basically hipfire if you want more damage and scorching rounds, ADS if you want more range and incandescent. Cloud Strike has had some bolt charge functionality added where now if you trigger the lightning storm via 3 precision hits, it grants 1 stack of bolt charge, and if you do it via getting a precision kill, it grants 5 stacks of bolt charge instead. Finally, Thunderlord has received a similar change where triggering a lightning strike grants a stack of bolt charge regardless of whether it's from a kill or sustained damage. Now for some weapon archetype changes. Scout rifles have received a 15% buff versus minors and 30% versus majors. Auto rifles received a 10% buff versus minors and majors. SMGs got 5% versus minors. Trace rifles got 20% versus minors. Fusion rifles got a 30% buff versus everything except bosses. Heavy grenade launchers got a 10% nerf versus bosses only, and reduced bonus reserves for rapid fire frames to 15% down from 25%, and linear fusion rifles got a 10% damage buff across the board. Glaives have received a number of buffs as well. They got a big stat increase across every archetype for aim assist, aim magnetism, damage fall off range, and improved hit registration, and the baseline effect at all stat values for handling, mag size, projectile, and reload speed has been increased. Plus, the final hit of the melee combo now deals double damage and inflicts much more flinch, so it might be time to finally start using glaives. Aggressive frame fusion rifles have been completely reworked to now fire a 3-round burst consisting of 4 pellets each, with each burst increasing in spread, and against minors and majors they now deal 15% more damage compared to all other fusion rifle archetypes, and compared to their previous behavior, per burst they now deal 43% more damage than before. The range stat on support frame auto rifles now dictates how how far away you can heal your allies. The higher the range stat, the further away the UI element appears, letting you know your ally is in healing range. Rocket-assisted frame sidearms have had their detonation damage reduced by 45%, but their impact damage increased by 100%, and aim assist and magnetism fall-off distances have been reduced by 8 meters, and they also received a 30% nerf against bosses, vehicles, and mini-bosses, which does include champions, by the way. The range stat has also been removed because it has no gameplay ramifications. However, Buried Bloodline's body shot damage is unaffected by these changes, and the critical damage has also received an 8% buff. Finally, it's time to close off by covering some additional weapon perk changes. Destabilizing rounds now grants volatile rounds for 5 seconds if the initial volatile explosion splashes to nearby targets, and the internal cooldown for that initial blast has been reduced from 4 seconds to 1 second. A very welcome change which now makes this perk very competitive. I'm looking at you, Choir of One. Full Court now works on area denial frame grenade launchers, and Ambitious Assassin has had both its multi-kill and reload timers removed. Loose Change has had its perk duration doubled from 4.5 seconds to now 9 seconds. Finally, Flash Counter no longer provides its unique 20% weaken, but instead creates a disorienting blast when taking damage after guarding that deals a moderate amount of damage. So there we have it. That's every change in update 8.2.0 explained as quickly and concisely as possible. This has been my first time making one of these videos, so let me know what you thought in the comments, and if you want me to continue making them for future updates, please also let me know if you liked it. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. If you made it this far, thank you so much. Your support means the world. And if you're really into the content I create, consider becoming a member of the channel, which not only lets you support me in the best way possible, it also nets you a whole host of awesome perks along with it. A massive shout out to these members up on screen, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now, dear viewer.